I still remember that morning like it was yesterday. The air was calm, the sky was clear, and my grandma was sitting on her porch sipping her usual cup of tea. She always said mornings were her favorite time of day, peaceful, quiet, and full of memories. But that morning, peace was about to be shattered in a way we never imagined. It started with a knock. Not the soft, polite kind. It was hard, angry, the kind that makes your heart skip a beat. Grandma looked at me and raised her eyebrows, confused. She wasn't expecting anyone. The mail had already been delivered, and the neighbors usually called before coming over. When she opened the door, 3 men in bright orange vests stood there. Their faces were cold and serious. One of them held a clipboard, another had a camera, and the third kept glancing around the yard like he owned the place. "Ma'am," the man with the clipboard said sharply, "we're from the Homeowners Association. We received reports that your property is in violation of the community guidelines." Grandma looked at them, calm but firm. "Violation?" she repeated softly. "Son, I own this place. I built this place before your HOA even existed." But the man didn't care. He started talking fast, throwing words like compliance, penalty, and mandatory inspection. It didn't make sense. Grandma wasn't even part of their HOA. She was the landlord who rented the land to them. That's what made this so crazy. Still, they pushed. They said they needed to inspect her house immediately. Grandma refused, of course. She told them kindly, but clearly that they had no right to enter her property. That's when things started to get ugly. The man with the camera began taking pictures of her front yard, her flowers, her mailbox, even her front door. He was snapping like a paparazzi at a movie premiere. Grandma asked him to stop, but he just smiled and said, "We're documenting the violations, ma'am." Violations? For what? Her roses blooming too brightly? I could see Grandma's hands start to tremble. Not from fear, but from anger. She had spent 40 years keeping that house perfect. Every brick, every flower, every inch of that yard was her pride. And now, a bunch of strangers were standing there acting like they owned it. Then, the man with the clipboard said something that made my blood run cold. "If you don't let us in," he said, "we'll have to take further action." Grandma straightened her back, her eyes sharp as glass. "Further action?" she repeated. "You better think twice before threatening me, young man." She wasn't scared. Not even a little. My grandma was the kind of woman who could make a grown man regret his words with just one look. But still, I could see the tension in her shoulders. She didn't want trouble. She just wanted peace. Then, out of nowhere, one of the men stepped forward and grabbed the doorknob. He tried to open it. That's when Grandma raised her voice for the first time. "Get your hand off my door," she shouted. Her voice echoed down the street. The sound was so sharp it even startled the birds. The men froze, shocked. But only for a second. The one with the clipboard smirked and said, "We're authorized to enter if the property owner refuses cooperation." Grandma took one slow step forward. "Son," she said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with power. "I am the property owner, and you're standing on my land without permission." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the wind seemed to stop. Then she pointed to the gate and said quietly, "Leave, now." But they didn't move. Instead, one of them muttered something under his breath, something about the law being on their side. That's when Grandma smiled, that kind of smile that says you just made the biggest mistake of your life. She turned around, walked inside, and came back out with a thick folder. She opened it right there on the porch. "Here," she said, "this is the original deed. The HOA pays me every month for the land you're standing on. You're standing on my property, boys, and if you try to open that door again, you'll be breaking into your landlord's house." The men went pale. Their arrogance vanished in seconds. You could almost see the panic set in, but Grandma wasn't done. She looked them straight in the eyes and said, "I've lived here long before your little association existed. I've seen men come and go, rules change and power fade. You think you can bully an old woman? Try me. It was powerful." I still get chills thinking about that moment. The men exchanged looks. They stepped back slowly. The one with the camera lowered it. The man with the clipboard mumbled, "We'll, come back later." And they walked away, not nearly as confident as when they arrived. Grandma didn't say a word until they were gone. Then she turned to me, took a deep breath, and said softly, "People like that forget what respect means. They think rules make them powerful, but they forget who built the ground they stand on. That day changed everything, because it wasn't just about the HOA trying to barge in. It was about how quickly people forget the roots that built their community. My grandma wasn't just a homeowner. She was the foundation of that neighborhood. She'd helped half those families get started. She'd been there when their kids were born, when their parents got sick, when life was hard, and now those same people, through the HOA, were trying to push her out. That night, Grandma sat in her rocking chair, looking out the window. She didn't say much, but I could tell she was thinking, planning. She wasn't the kind of person who got angry and did nothing. No, she was the kind of person who fought back with facts, not fists. She told me, "You can't teach respect to people who think money gives them power, but you can remind them who really holds the key." Over the next few days, Grandma started gathering papers, old property agreements, rent contracts, HOA bylaws, everything. She made copies, highlighted sections, and placed sticky notes all over the table. It looked like a lawyer's office in there. I asked her what she was doing, and she said, "If they want to fight, we'll give them one, but we'll do it the right way." And I knew right then the HOA had messed with the wrong woman, because this wasn't just about property. It was about dignity, about respect, about a woman who had spent her whole life building a home, only for a group of strangers to try and claim it as their own. That day taught me something powerful. Never underestimate someone just because they're older. Experience is a weapon stronger than any rule book. Grandma might have been small in size, but her presence filled the whole room. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Because when an old soul decides to fight, she doesn't fight for herself. She fights for every person who ever got bullied, dismissed, or disrespected for standing their ground. And Grandma, she was just getting started. That night after the HOA men left, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Grandma didn't talk much, but I could tell her mind was racing. She sat in her favorite rocking chair by the window, the same one she'd sat in since I was a kid. The moonlight fell across her face, and I could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't scared. She was planning. "People like them," she finally said, "think they can scare others into silence, but they picked the wrong house for that." The next morning, Grandma woke up early. She made her tea, put on her reading glasses, and sat down at the kitchen table with a stack of papers taller than her teapot. Old property records, payment receipts, letters from the HOA, everything. I didn't know where she even found some of those documents. She opened one file, then another, flipping through with steady hands. Every so often she'd smile and whisper to herself, "Found you." I sat across from her, amazed. "Grandma," I asked, "why don't you just call the police?" "They tried to break in." She looked up and smiled softly. "The police will come and go, but proof stays forever," she said. "When you fight people who hide behind titles and papers, you beat them with their own game, paperwork and truth." That was my grandma. Strong, calm, and wise. By afternoon, she had a plan. She wasn't going to wait for the HOA to come back. She was going to them. She picked up the phone and called the HOA office. The lady on the other end sounded nervous when Grandma said her name. Everyone in that neighborhood knew who she was. After all, she owned the land most of them lived on. "I'd like to schedule a meeting," Grandma said firmly. "Tomorrow morning. I have something you'll want to see." The next day, I drove her to the HOA office. It was one of those shiny new buildings that looked impressive from the outside, but felt cold inside. The walls were covered with fancy signs and fake smiles. As soon as we walked in, the man with the clipboard, the same one who tried to open her door, looked up. His smile faded instantly. "Mrs. Green," he said stiffly, "we didn't expect to see you here." "Well," Grandma said, "I figured it was time we talked. You seem to have forgotten who you're renting from." He gestured toward a small conference room, clearly uncomfortable. We followed him inside. There were 3 people from the HOA, all sitting upright like they were waiting for a school inspection. Grandma placed her folder on the table, opened it slowly, and said, You said I violated your rules. Now let's talk about the rules you violated. Then she began. One by one, she pulled out documents, signed contracts, ownership deeds, letters with dates, and signatures from decades ago. She spoke clearly, her voice calm but firm. You see this? She said, tapping on a paper. This is the land lease agreement signed 25 years ago. Your HOA pays rent to me. That means you operate under my permission. And this, she pointed to another paper, is the clause that says no member of the HOA has authority to enter or inspect my property without written consent. The room went silent. One of the board members tried to interrupt her, but Grandma didn't even look up. I'm not done, she said. Then she took out her phone and pressed play. The sound of that knock, that hard, angry knock, echoed through the room. She had recorded the entire encounter from yesterday. Every word, every threat. Every moment they tried to open her door. When the part played where the man said, "We're authorized to enter," I saw the same man lower his head in shame. Grandma looked at them all and said quietly, I don't want to take this to court. I don't want to humiliate anyone. I just want you to remember your place. It wasn't a threat. It was truth. And it hit them hard. The head of the HOA, a woman in her 50s, cleared her throat and said softly, Mrs. Green, we had no idea. There must have been some misunderstanding. Grandma leaned back in her chair and smiled faintly. Misunderstanding? She repeated. Breaking into someone's home is not a misunderstanding. It's arrogance. You could feel the weight of her words fill the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. After a few moments, Grandma gathered her papers, closed the folder, and stood up. I'll give you a week, she said, to send me a written apology. If I don't get it, I'll be sending copies of these documents to every homeowner under your association, so they know exactly who's leading them. The man with the clipboard nodded quickly, his hands shaking. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly. When we left the building, the cold air outside felt lighter. Grandma walked with her head held high, her steps slow but strong. She didn't need anger. She had something stronger, dignity. As we reached the car, she turned to me and said, You see, respect isn't given. It's earned. And sometimes you have to remind people who you are. That moment, I felt proud, not just because she stood up for herself, but because she showed me what real strength looks like. Over the next few days, things changed quickly. The HOA sent a formal letter of apology, not just to Grandma, but to the entire neighborhood. They admitted they acted out of line and promised to review their internal rules, but word spread fast. Neighbors started coming to Grandma's house, knocking on her door, this time gently, respectfully. Mrs. Green, one woman said, I didn't know they tried to break in. That's awful. You've done so much for this community. Another man brought flowers. You're the reason half of us even have homes here, he said. It was beautiful. The same people who once looked at her like just another old lady now looked at her with admiration. But Grandma didn't gloat. She didn't even talk about it much. She just smiled and said, It's over now. Except, it wasn't. 1 week later, Grandma received another letter. This one wasn't from the HOA. It was from their lawyer. They were challenging her land ownership, claiming that the property lines were unclear. When I read the letter aloud, my stomach dropped. It was a trap, their way of trying to regain power after being humiliated, but Grandma didn't panic. She simply folded the paper neatly, placed it on the table, and said, Looks like round 2. Her calmness amazed me. I asked, Aren't you tired of fighting, Grandma? She smiled. Tired? Maybe. But sometimes, standing up for yourself isn't just about winning. It's about teaching people that you can't be pushed around. That night, she called her old friend, a retired lawyer who had helped her years ago with property paperwork. They spoke for almost 2 hours. When she hung up, she looked peaceful again. Tomorrow, she said, we'll pay the lawyer a visit. If they want to play with the law, we'll show them what the law really says. The next morning, she put on her best coat, brushed her silver hair, and wore her favorite brooch, a small golden bird that Grandpa had given her decades ago. She said it reminded her to always stay free. As we drove to her lawyer's office, I realized something. Grandma wasn't fighting for the house anymore. She was fighting for her voice, for her right to live without being bullied by people who thought their rules were bigger than her rights. When we reached the lawyer's office, she handed over the letter. The lawyer read it carefully, then smiled. "Well, they just made a big mistake," he said. "They're challenging the ownership of land that's legally documented in your name, recorded and renewed multiple times. If they take this to court, they'll lose. Badly." Grandma smiled back. "Good," she said. "Then maybe they'll learn what happens when you forget who the real landlord is." For the first time in days, she laughed. That warm, soft laugh that always filled the house with comfort. As we left the lawyer's office, I felt proud. But more than that, I felt grateful, because I realized that her fight wasn't just hers. It was a lesson for all of us. No matter how big or small you are, how old or young, never let anyone take away what you've earned. That day, as the sun began to set and Grandma looked out the car window, she whispered, "It's not about property, it's about respect. And that's something I'll never give up." The next few days felt quiet again. But it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that comes before a storm. Grandma went about her days calmly, watering her flowers, feeding the birds, and baking her favorite cinnamon bread. But I could tell she was waiting. Waiting for the next move, and sure enough, it came. One morning we heard the mail slot click. A thick white envelope landed on the floor. Grandma picked it up, opened it slowly, and sighed. "It's from the HOA again," she said quietly. Inside was a long letter full of legal words, cold, sharp, and threatening. They accused her of unlawful land use and failure to comply with association zoning standards. It didn't make sense. None of it did. They were twisting her own property records against her. I felt my stomach turn. "Grandma, this is ridiculous," I said. "They can't do this." But she just smiled faintly. "Oh, they can try," she said. "But they won't win." Then she looked at me and added softly, "They're not just after me anymore. They're after control." That day she called her lawyer again. The two spent hours going through every paper, every clause, every line of the contracts. By the end of the evening, the lawyer looked both tired and amazed. "Mrs. Green," he said, "not only are you right, but what they're doing might be illegal." Grandma raised an eyebrow. "Illegal?" "Yes," the lawyer said. "They've been collecting extra fees from homeowners, fees that aren't listed in the original HOA bylaws. They might have been doing this for years. If you take this to court, you won't just win your case, you'll expose their whole operation." For the first time, I saw Grandma's eyes widen. Not in fear, but in surprise. She leaned back in her chair and whispered, "So that's why they came after me." Everything suddenly made sense. They weren't trying to inspect her house out of concern. They were trying to scare her, to make her stay silent, because she had the old land records that proved how much power they didn't have. That night, Grandma didn't sleep much. She sat in her rocking chair, her tea untouched, just thinking. I asked her if she was okay, and she said, "Sweetheart, sometimes people build walls of lies so high they forget there's truth underneath. Tomorrow we'll remind them." The next morning she made a call, not to the HOA but to a local reporter. She told them everything. Within hours, a small news crew was at our house. They set up cameras on the porch, asked questions, and took pictures of the documents. Grandma spoke calmly and clearly, just like she did at the HOA meeting. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," she said on camera. "I'm here to protect what's right. The HOA doesn't own this land. They never did. And the people who live here deserve to know where their money's going." Her story aired that evening on the local news, and just like that, everything changed. Phones started ringing. Neighbors showed up, shocked. Some of them were in tears. They had no idea their HOA had been overcharging them. One man said he'd been paying special maintenance fees for years without ever knowing where the money went. The next day, the HOA office was flooded with angry homeowners demanding answers. The same people who once ignored Grandma's quiet presence were now looking to her for guidance. She didn't celebrate, though. She just said, Truth speaks louder than anger. A few days later, the local newspaper published a full article about the HOA scandal. It explained how certain board members had been secretly taking funds for administrative costs that didn't exist. And the best part? The land records Grandma had preserved for decades were the proof that exposed everything. The HOA board was forced to resign. The men who had tried to break into her house were under investigation. And the homeowners voted to rebuild their association, this time with honesty. When the news broke, people came to Grandma's house again, not with flowers this time, but with gratitude. "Mrs. Green," one woman said, her voice shaking, "if you hadn't stood up, we would have never known. You saved us." Grandma smiled kindly and said, "I didn't save anyone. I just told the truth. The truth does the saving." Those words hit me deep. Because that's who she was. Never proud, never loud, just quietly strong. A week later, a city official came by with a plaque, a small token of recognition for community integrity and service. They gave it to Grandma in front of everyone. The crowd clapped and even the mayor showed up. Grandma looked at the plaque, then at everyone and said softly, "Respect doesn't come from titles or offices. It comes from doing what's right, even when it's hard." There wasn't a dry eye in that yard. After everyone left, Grandma sat back on her porch, the evening sun glowing behind her. I sat beside her, feeling the cool breeze and the quiet peace we hadn't felt in weeks. She looked at me and said, "You know, I didn't fight because I wanted to win. I fought because your grandpa and I built this home with love, and no one, no association, no paper, has the right to take that away." I smiled. "You showed them, Grandma," she chuckled softly. "No," she said. "I showed them that even when the world gets louder, kindness and truth still matter." We sat there for a long time. The sun set slowly, the sky turning orange and gold. For the first time in weeks, Grandma looked peaceful again. A few days later, she received a letter, this time from the new HOA board. It was short, respectful, and sincere. They thanked her for standing up for the community and invited her to serve as an honorary advisor. Grandma read it carefully, then smiled. "Looks like they finally learned something," she said. She didn't say yes or no right away. She just said, "If they ever forget again, I'll remind them." That was my grandma, steady as a rock, gentle as a breeze, but unbreakable when it mattered most. From that day on, people started calling her the landlord of the HOA, not out of mockery but respect. It became a local legend. And honestly, she deserved it. Sometimes I still drive by her old house. The flowers still bloom bright. The mailbox still shines. The porch still creaks softly when the wind blows. And even though she's not sitting there anymore, you can still feel her presence, strong, calm, and wise. Every time I see that house, I remember what she taught me. That age doesn't make you weak. That truth is louder than fear. And that respect isn't demanded. It's earned, one honest act at a time, because Grandma didn't just fight for her home. She fought for the soul of the community. And in the end, she didn't just win a battle. She changed the way people saw what's right and wrong.